Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today we're going to do a starter guide for KNULLI. This is a Linux-based operating system that is forked from Batocera, and it's meant to run a lot of smaller or lower-end handhelds. It just recently got a new update with a lot of new improved features, which I want to talk about in this video, and of course we're going to show you how to set it up from scratch as well. At the time of this video, there are 11 different handhelds that are supported by this operating system, and the number just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it is one of my favorite custom OS solutions, especially for newcomers, because I feel like it takes care of a lot of the process for you. Either way, we got a lot of ground to cover, so grab a snack and drink and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's start by talking about what is KNULLI and how does it compare to other operating system options that we have. So this is a Linux-based operating system that is focused on retro gaming, and it's actually a fork of another operating system called Batocera, which is mostly used on PCs. And KNULLI supports a ton of handhelds, including all of the Anbernic RG XX devices. There are, I think, 9 of those out right now, and then also there's the TrimUI Smart Pro and TrimUI Brick. Now, the reason why I like KNULLI so much is because it's very easy to set up. I think it's an excellent introductory operating system. It uses emulation stationed as its front end, which means that as you navigate through, you can choose all of your games, and then you can pick them from here. In addition, we've got things like scraped box art and videos, and just a bunch of other neat quality of life services. They've also added a ton of functionality that we'll talk about throughout this video, including things like, controlling RGB lighting, or just pressing and holding the power button to turn the device off, and auto-resuming your games if you're in the middle of a game when you close it down. Now, KNULLI is not the only operating system that you can play on these devices, so I want to talk about 2 other custom options that you have and how these fit into the whole picture. On the left side, we have MinUI. This is the most simple of the operating systems. So this one is essentially text-based and really focused on just the primary systems that you would expect to play. So this is mostly going to play your Nintendo and Sega systems and also PS1. Now, there are ways to add more functionality to it. For example, here you can see that I added Dreamcast and Nintendo 64, but those were with additional community packs. By default, it's mostly going to be your simple Nintendo systems, and there are other ways to tweak it, for example, adding box art and whatnot, but each of those processes are a little bit more involved. MinUI is focused on being a plug-and-play system. In fact, this is the one that I often will install on operating systems when I'm giving a device to somebody who doesn't know anything about emulation, because it is just so simple to be able to pick your system, pick your game, and go from there. So I would say that KNULLI is a step up in terms of functionality because it has these nice colorful menus, the ability to scrape your box art and everything via the Wi-Fi on the device, and so this one is just a little bit more taken care of. KNULLI also has a bunch of pre-configurations and additional systems that are not supported by MinUI, at least right out of the box. Now on the right side we have MuOS, which stands for Mustard OS. Now this one is a little bit more involved than KNULLI. This one has a lot more freedom in terms of navigation. There's a bunch of different themes that you can use, and you can also just tailor the actual organization of your games however you would like. So the way I see it, MuOS is a little bit further in that spectrum of giving you more freedom, but it does require a little bit more setup. This is also a very simple system to actually get set up, but I would say that between the 3, this one probably takes a little bit more work to tweak to your own preferences. And so I kind of see KNULLI as splitting the difference between the 2. MinUI is very simple on purpose, whereas MuOS gives you a lot of freedom. KNULLI kind of takes care of the rest for you, so that's why I think it's a good introductory operating system. Now, as we get started with setting up KNULLI, probably the first thing you need to think about is what device you're going to play it on and how are you going to manage your storage. With most of these Anbernic RG XX devices, we have 2 microSD card slots, which we can use to our advantage with KNULLI. This means that we can put the operating system on a smaller card on the left, and then on the right side with our external card, we can actually put our games and our settings. This means that if anything ever happens to your operating system, for example, you need to reflash a new version, you can actually just do that on this one card and all of your games are going to stay here. Now, if you'd like, you can also just use one single microSD card. You would put it right here. That's going to hold the operating system and your games. And for some devices, like the TrimUI Brick, this one only has a single microSD card slot. So that's going to be your only choice, is to get a card that's going to fit all of your games as well as the operating system. So when it comes to getting a microSD card, it's really going to depend on what you plan on using. This is the 2-card setup right here. So you'd have a smaller 16GB card. This is going to have the operating system. And then you have a larger card where you can put your games on there. And there's no real limitation to the size of the card, but generally I stick to like 128, maybe 256. It really depends on the type of games that you plan on playing. If you're going to be playing a lot of CD-based systems, things like PS1 and Dreamcast, then yes, you want to have a larger file size because those ROMs are larger. But if you're going to be playing old cartridge games, Game Boy and Super Nintendo, or arcade games, most of those are going to be relatively small as well. And so in this video, we are going to use a 2-card setup just so I can show you that process, but a single card setup is actually just going to work out of the box, so there's no additional configuration. And so now let's move over to my computer and actually set up KNULLI on this smaller microSD card and then go from there. Okay, so first thing, we're going to go to the KNULLI website here, which is knulli.org, and this is going to have an entire wiki set up. So if you have any questions about setting up anything, you can usually find it here on the website. It is very comprehensive. And so first thing here, we want to install the operating system. We're going to go into the quick start guide here, and then you can see they have the GitHub repository link. This is where all the files are going to be hosted. If we scroll down a little bit, this is where we can see the list of all the systems that are supported. Now, my example device in this video is going to be the Anbernic RG XX. So this is the image that I want to download. Bear in mind, it is a little bit on the large side. You can see that it's about 2 gigabytes, so it will take a few minutes to download. Once we have that image downloaded, we want to flash it to a microSD card. For this example, I'm going to use an app called Rufus. I will leave it linked down below. It's one of my favorites. Also, make sure that you have your microSD card plugged in. You can see this one right here, 16 gigabytes. Now on the right side, we will find a select button. Click on that, and then now find that image file that you downloaded. Mine is right here. After that, you can hit open, and then that's really it. Just hit start. It's going to ask, do you really want to do this? And you hit, yeah, man, I want to do it. This also will take a few minutes to write the image to the microSD card. So this is a great time to grab that snack and drink if you don't have one already. And it is worth noting that with Rufus, it's going to stall around 99.9% and even 100%, but just give it a minute, it's just finishing up. And once you see the words ready, we are good to go. So we can now close out of this app, and then you can eject the microSD card, and we are ready to actually put it inside of the device. Okay, so here is my 16 gigabyte card, which I have just now flashed with KNULLI. So I'm going to put it inside of my device. Now, you could just use a single larger card if you would like as well, but like I mentioned, we're going to do a 2-card setup. Once you've added the microSD card, you can just press and hold the power button until the device turns on. And you're going to have the KNULLI startup screen like this. Now, the current version is called Gladiator, but over time this will change as they come out with new updates. Either way, the first time it runs, it's going to resize the file system for you and just prepare the microSD card for use. One of the great updates of this new Gladiator version is that it now runs with an exFAT file format system, which means that you can use this with a Windows PC. Previously, you had to move over all of your games via a network access, and so that was a little bit harder to set up. Okay, so once we're in, the first thing you may hear is some background music running. And so if you don't want to hear background music as you're navigating through the system, you can just press start and then go into the sound settings. And then right under here, it says front end music. You can turn this one off, and that's going to turn off that background music. You'll also see that it does have some populated systems. And that's because they put on a couple freeware games. If we go into like PC Engine, you can see there's like 2 different games right here. There's like an NES game, things like that. Those are all freeware games. If you want to get rid of any of these games, just go into the system, press and hold the A button. And then when this pops up, there's an option to delete game. And so if you want to get rid of them, that's how you do it. Now, the first thing we want to do is add our own games. But because we're using a 2-card setup, let's set up the second card first. So here is my 128 gigabyte second microSD card. I have not done anything with this thing at all, so I'm just going to put it directly into my device. After that, give it a minute to actually register with the operating system. Now you can press start. Now go into the system settings here near the bottom. And in here, you'll see an option for storage device. So within this, you can see that it's already found the no-name card right here with 128 gigabytes. I'm going to set mine to any external. That means I can use any SD card here. Once I set that and go back, it's going to say that I need to restart the device to configure that. So we're going to go into quit and then restart system. And once the device restarts, it's going to initialize this microSD card. So you'll see some of that same verbiage again. That's only because it's setting it up, like adding the pre-populated folders, stuff like that. And so here we are with a second microSD card setup. Everything is good to go. And so now we need to shut down the device. And there are 2 different ways to do that within KNULLI. The first way would be to just press start and then go down to quit and then shut down system. And so that will turn off the device. However, with more recent versions of KNULLI, you can actually just press and hold the power button until you hear the device just make a little bit of a rumble, and then that will actually turn the device off. And so there we go. We now have a safe shutdown by just pressing and holding the power button. I really love that feature. Now I'm going to take out my second microSD card, put it back into our computer, and start adding our games. Okay, now here we are back on the computer. I've added my 128GB card, and you can see there's a bunch of folders here. If we go into the ROMs folder, you can see there's a bunch of subfolders. So each of these are going to correspond to a certain system. For example, if we go into the NES folder, you can see that we have that NES game that was freeware right here. And so this has already been populated with some of these games. And so now we need to add our ROM files to each of these individual folders, and each folder here is going to correspond to a specific system. And if you have any questions about which system goes in which folder, then I would recommend checking out the Batocera systems page. I'll leave it linked down below. So essentially with this one, you can go through, pick out your system, and it'll tell you exactly which types of files you're supposed to add. So right here, it says accepted ROM formats. In addition, it also will tell you what kind of BIOS files are going to be required. We'll talk about that later. And so the way I do this is on the left side, I have my microSD card and my ROMs folder, and all of these are empty here. On the right side, I have an external hard drive plugged in, and this is my own ROM library. So for example, I've got a bunch of Game Boy games here. I want to move these over. And so I'm going to grab all those files, and then I'm going to find my Game Boy folder, and then I'm just going to drag and drop them over. This is going to make a copy of each of those games and put them into the microSD card. And so now I have my Game Boy game set up. And so really that's kind of it. This is my Game Boy Advance games right here. So I'm going to move those over now, and it really doesn't matter where you get your games from. You can use like the original card that maybe came with your device if it has ROMs, or if you have your own ROM library. Just move these over to the corresponding folders here within KNULLI. And this is often the most mundane part of the process, finding all those game files and then moving them over. But once you've got that all set up, you should be good to go. And again, if you have any questions about which files go in which folder, I would recommend checking out that Batocera website. Now, also on the microSD card, in addition to that ROMs folder, we have a BIOS folder. This is where we're going to put our system files. These are only necessary for certain systems to run properly. On the right side, I have my generic BIOS pack right here. And so this includes things like my Dreamcast BIOS, as well as things like Sega CD, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, as well as PS1. For the most part, these will probably be the main systems you'll have to move the BIOS files over for. Everything else will usually just run without BIOS. And once again, if you've got any questions about these, then I would recommend checking out that Batocera website. Now, these files are copyrighted, much like ROM files, so you are on your own to find them. Okay, and so once you've moved over your ROM files and your BIOS files, you can now eject your microSD card and put it back into your device. Now, one of the nice things about the Anbernic RG XX devices is that they have HDMI video out, and KNULLI supports that. So I'm just using a capture card right here, so you can actually see me working through the system in more detail. And if we go into any of these systems, you can now see that we have all of our games listed. These are the ROMs that I just added. Before we jump into the games, let me walk you through the system settings. So I'm going to press Start. This will bring up the main menu. So let's go through some of these things just to do some initial configuration. To start, let's go into game settings. So these game settings are going to work across the entire system. So any change we make right here will work for all the systems that run under KNULLI. For example, this is where we can set up our Retro Achievements login credentials if you want to use that. Another feature within KNULLI is the ability to check for your BIOS files. If you go and do the missing BIOS check, it's going to look at all the systems that you have with games added and let you know whether or not anything is missing. So right here, it's saying that we are missing the Game Boy Advance Super Game Boy BIOS. These are not necessary to run the system, but it will give you that warning. Same thing here with PC Engine. It's saying that we don't have this specific system card, which is necessary to run PC Engine CD games. Neither of these two will actually prevent me from playing my game, so what I'm going to do here is actually turn off this check BIOS files before running a game. That way, when I start up any of those systems, it's not going to give me a warning like, hey, you're missing these BIOS, because I don't really need these two BIOS here in particular. Now the next feature is to autosave and auto-load your games. I like to turn this one on. This means that when I close out of a game, it's going to save it. And then when I start up that same game, it's going to take me right back to where I was. Another new feature is the quick resume mode. So if we turn this one on, that means that if we power off the device while a game is running, it's going to take us right back into that same game at that same moment. So this is great if you just want to jump in and out of your games. I'll show you how this works here in a second. Now further down, we have our default global settings. And for the most part, I don't really mess with these. You can turn on specific shaders and whatnot, but because we're at this system level, I don't usually like to use any of this. One thing I do like to turn on is the toggle fast forward. So I do turn this one on, which means that once we set up our hotkeys, this will turn on fast forward and turn it off every time we use it. Speaking of which, let's talk about our RetroArch hotkeys. This is a new feature that is now implemented in KNULLI. So if we go in here, it's going to show all of the different hotkeys that we have set up and what they are by default, but you can actually change them now for the systems that run under RetroArch. So for example, the default hotkey plus right is fast forward, but I personally like to do hotkey plus R2. So I can go in here and change that to R2 instead. Same thing with save state. I like to do save state with R1, and then same thing with load state. This one I like to have as L1. Now personally, I like to use the RetroArch menu by pressing the hotkey as well as X, but it's by default set to B. I have found that with this current update, even changing this to X will still make it go to B. So this is a bug that they will probably fix in the future. Another thing worth noting is that sometimes you will create your own conflicts. For example, right here, the default hotkey is L1, but I've already set that up with load state. And so what you can do here is assign it to a different button, or I personally just like to turn it off because I don't usually take a screenshot. And so that's one thing I like to do. If there are a bunch of hotkeys I don't plan on using, I like to set it to none because I don't want to accidentally press that, and that way I don't also have any conflicts. Either way, it's awesome that we can set up our own default hotkeys for RetroArch, so I've done that now. Now further down we have our per system advanced configuration. This one will work with each specific console. So for example, if we wanted to make changes specific to Game Boy Color, this is where we would do that. So if we wanted to change the aspect ratio to something else, we can do that specific to Game Boy Color. Now in addition to making a change specific to Game Boy Color, we can do it specifically for a game too. So if we go into the Game Boy settings, and right here if we press and hold the A button, this will bring us the ability to go into advanced game options. And so now we can make a lot of these same changes, but only for this specific Castlevania adventure game. And so that's how game settings work. We can either change it for the entire handheld, or we can go into the per system advanced configuration if we want to do it for one specific system, and then we can also change it on a per game basis as well. Now let's move on and talk about some of these other settings. Before we get into these, I recommend going into your network settings and actually setting up your Wi-Fi. So you want to turn on Wi-Fi here. Once that's set up, it's going to ask you for your SSID so you can scan for any nearby network and then add your own credentials. And once you've added that, you can back out, and after a moment, it'll say that Wi-Fi is enabled. So now that we're set up with our network, you can see the little Wi-Fi antenna up in the top right. We can now go into the updates and download section. And the number one thing here is the themes downloader. So within here, you have a bunch of different options that you can choose from. These are essentially all of the Batocera themes, but there are some that are specific for KNULLI as well. So for example, let's check out this canvas one right here. So I'm just going to click on that and then install, and then it's going to download in the background. And while that's downloading, let's talk about the user interface settings. This is where we can adjust things like our themes. And so by default, we have the Artbook Next theme, and we can go into theme configuration and make some adjustments here. Say, for example, under system artwork, you can change this to be different. Let's do the circuit one so you can see what I'm talking about. So if I choose this one and then back out, now you can see that we have circuit boards instead of the other ones that we were seeing earlier. And so even within each of these themes, we have additional configurations that we can make. I'm going to set it back to the default one, but yeah, that's how you can make those adjustments. And there's a whole world of things that you can do within here. I would recommend experimenting and seeing what you like in terms of look and feel for your device. Now, once we've installed our new theme, for example, the canvas one, we can go into user interface settings, and under theme set, we should now be able to see the canvas one right here. So I'm going to choose that, and then I'm going to back out to the main menu, and you will see that the theme now has changed. And so this is what it looks like by default. I think it looks pretty cool, very different than the original one that we were looking at. In addition, if we go into the user interface settings here under theme configuration, we have other adjustments we can make. For example, under System Icon Theme, let's change it to icons instead. Now, if we go back, instead of showing the artwork, we should see the actual system like a controller for it. So that's pretty cool. We've also got a bunch of different color schemes we can change it out to. One of my favorites is Famicom, so I'm going to change it to that one instead. And so there we go. This is what my theme looks like now. I've got this nice deep red, and then also it shows the icons instead of the art itself. And of course, you can just change it to whatever you would like. Another thing worth noting within the user interface settings is the game launch transition. So I like to set mine to fade. That means that as I start up a game, the screen is going to fade before the game starts up. Either way, you've got a lot of options within user interface settings, so I do recommend messing around within there. Now next we have our game collection settings. So here we can actually adjust, for example, what systems are displayed. For example, with Commodore 64, I didn't add any games. It just has that standard freeware game that was added. So I'm going to uncheck that one. And so you can go through here and decide what you want to see and what you don't want to see. So if there are some certain ports or anything else you don't want to see, you can uncheck them. And now when I go back into the system, you will see that it'll reset itself, and now it's a little bit cleaner of a menu. Also, under automatic game collections, there are a bunch already set up, like your all games, your last play games, and your favorites. So if you don't want to see any of these, you can uncheck them as well. And so it's really going to be up to you and what you want to see in your front end interface, but that's how you would change those systems. You can even go even further and create your own collection. So say, for example, you have like Metroidvania games. You want those all to be in one collection. You can create that right here. Also near the bottom, you can really get into the weeds. For example, under Start on System, you can change whatever system you want to actually be highlighted when you start up your device. So say, for example, you want to play Super Nintendo games primarily on this handheld. You can set this to Super Nintendo and then also do Start on Game List. That means that it'll actually start in the game list of Super Nintendo when you start up your handheld. So essentially, this is what it would look like when you start up your device. It's actually going to take you right into your Super Nintendo systems. One thing that you could do is set up your favorites to be your startup system, which means that if you set up all your favorite games, like the ones you want to focus on, you can have it start directly in that game list. That'll give you a very curated experience. Either way, that's just one of the many things that you can do within KNULLI to customize your experience. Now, we'll talk about scraping later on, but next I want to talk about device settings. So within here, you can actually change your RGB settings if you have one of those devices that has RGB lights around it. And within here, we've got a bunch of different options. For example, you have a static color by default, but you can change this to be other functions as well. You can also change the color of your RGB by changing out the parameters here within red, green, and blue. Either way, that's how you would set up the RGB lighting here on your device, and of course you can just turn it off if you would like to. Next, under system settings, there are some things you could do. For example, you can change out your time zone, but once you connect to the network, it will usually find it for you. But also here, there are some more advanced configurations. For example, if you wanted to set up something like Sync Thing, this is where you would turn it on. Now finally, let's talk about Scraper. So this is going to allow us to add box art to our games. If we go into the systems right now, if we like say, for example, go into Game Boy Advance, we don't see any box art, it just has the name of the game. So let's go into Scraper and set this up. First thing you want to do is go into Scraper settings, then add your username and password from screenscraper.fr. This is totally free to set up, but once you have that going, it's going to make it a lot easier to scrape all of your games. Now within the Scraper settings, I like to make a couple changes. For example, under image source, I prefer to use Box2D. This means it'll show the box art when you're navigating through the systems, and I just like to do that. It reminds me of going to like a Blockbuster back in the day. Also under the Scrape For section, I like to turn on video because I like to see the videos if I hover over the game for a moment. And then finally down near the bottom under Systems Included, this is where you can choose which systems you're going to scrape. So I'm actually going to go down to Select None and remove all of them, and then I'm just going to pick one. Let's do the original Game Boy. Now I'm going to press back, and then under Scrape Now, I will start the scraping process. And depending on the size of your library, this may take a long time or a little bit. For example, here I've got 53 games under Game Boy, so this will probably take me about 5 minutes. Okay, once the scraping is completed, you want to go into the game settings here and then hit Update Games List. This is going to rescrape everything, and now if we go into the Game Boy system, we should see all of our box art. And so here we go, as I'm navigating through, you can see I'm seeing all of the box art, and if I hover over the game for a moment, it's actually going to start playing a video. So super cool, a really cool way of being able to navigate through all of our systems here and get a feel for what the game is going to be like before we even start it up. By the way, if you ever want to add a game to your favorite, just press and hold the X button. That's going to add it to your favorites, and if you want to remove it, just do the same. And so that's a quick orientation with KNULLI. We can press start and go into the system settings here and make our adjustments, and then we can also do things like change out our theme and add box art and stuff like that. Okay, now that we have this device mostly set up in terms of, adding our games and some box art and stuff like that, let's actually start playing some games and show you some of the things that you can do within KNULLI here as well. So let's start by going into our Game Boy system, then we can navigate through our games. Let's start with Castlevania Adventure. And the first thing you'll notice is that when the game starts up, we will get the Game Boy boot logo. That's because I added the BIOS file earlier. Now, once I have the game started, you will see that number one, we've got a bit of a green colorization. I think it looks really good, very OG when it comes to the Game Boy. You can also add things like shaders and overlays. I've got an entire video guide about that. I will leave it linked down below. But for now, the main thing I wanted to show is that my hotkeys are now set up. So if I press the M button, which is the menu button on this device, and then R2, it'll go into fast forward. And then if I press it again, that's going to toggle it off. And so I have my hotkey set up now. Now to exit out of game, I would just press the menu and start button at the same time. That's going to save my progress because I turned on that auto save. And now the next time that I start it up, it should take me back to where I was. So let's go ahead and test it out. I'm going to press the A button here to start up the game. And with any luck, it should boot me back to exactly where I was before. And so there we go. It took about maybe 10 seconds to boot up the game. I think that's pretty great. Now the other thing that I also turned on was that quick resume function. So now if I press and hold the power button while the game is running, and if I just wait a minute, it'll, buzz and then it'll turn the device off. And now I can just press and hold the power button and it's going to boot directly into the game as opposed to the KNULLI menu. And so there we go, and I think the boot up time is actually pretty fast as well. It used to take like 40 seconds to boot up KNULLI, but nowadays it's a lot faster. I will leave the timestamp on the top left. And so there we go, that's a quick down and dirty in terms of just getting started with your games, being able to navigate through the system, choose your game, and then launch it from here, and then it'll auto-save and auto-load, and you can also use that quick resume function as well to power off at any time. Now, some of the new features in KNULLI are actually device specific, so let me walk you through a couple of those. We'll start with the Anbernic RG XX SP. So this is a clamshell handheld, and this one actually has a lid functionality. So the way this is set up, if you press the start button and now go into the device settings, if we go into the power management section, there's a lid close mode. And by default, it's going to be set to suspend, but what I like to do is actually set it to shut down. So what this means is that when I close the lid, it's going to shut down the device. And this is going to work great in combination with all the other configurations we've already set up. So I have the autosave and auto-load turned on, as well as that quick resume, and now the lid shut down. And so the combination of all three means that if I'm in the middle of playing a game, all I have to do is just close it and it'll turn the device off. It takes a moment, so you'll see here, the RGB light will go off here in a few seconds. And once that turns off, that means your device is now turned off. But the cool thing here is that if I now press and hold the power button to start it up, it's not only going to start up the game, it's going to go exactly where I was before. And so this is a great plug and play option here for a clamshell device in particular. I love the idea of being able to play my game, and the moment I'm done with it, I just close the lid, it's going to save it, it's going to turn the device off, I don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. And the next time that I'm ready to actually start up the system, I'll be able to go directly back into that same game in the same moment as before. So this is a really handy function that is already available in a couple other OSs like MuOS and MinUI, but they've now brought it over to KNULLI, and I think that's awesome. Now on the TrimUI brick, this one has its own RGB lights, like back here behind the shoulder buttons, as well as here on the front, and these function as L3 and R3. And like I was showing earlier with the HDMI capture, I can go in and change the RGB lightings here under device settings. And so you can see, for example, I've changed it to mostly green here in the settings, that's why we have this nice green color. Now this device also has a toggle switch, and that's available in the device settings. So I have it set to RGB on and off. So if I turn this off, it's going to turn off the RGB lights. And if I turn it back on, they will come back on again. And so that's kind of nice little toggle. You can also use it to mute your device as well as turn on airplane mode. So we've got a bunch of different options here that are specific to the TrimUI brick. And then finally, one other option I wanted to show off is something that I've shown off in other videos too, is that I have essentially made this device a Game Boy Advance system, but using KNULLI. So what happens right now is when I launch this device, it just goes right into my Game Boy Advance menu. And so I can navigate through here, pick my system, and go on from there. And this is also pretty easy to configure. So it's all really just a matter of using a specific theme, which is the Canvas theme that we downloaded earlier. And so I downloaded the Canvas theme, and then under theme configuration, I changed it to the Famicom color scheme. After that, I went into the game collection settings, and within here near the bottom, like I was talking about earlier, I set it up to be Game Boy Advance and then to boot directly into the game list. And so that's why the moment I start up this device, it's going to take me into my Game Boy Advance list right here. Now, obviously, you don't need to use this theme. You don't have to use this color scheme, but this is one of the many options that you could do. And if I ever do get a hankering to try out any of the other systems, I can just press the B button. It'll take me back to this menu right here. So I can do the same with things like NES. But when it comes to the RG34XX in particular, I think this is an awesome Game Boy Advance system that's not really that great for everything else. And so I like to just boot it into Game Boy Advance. This one feels like a better fit for me. One last thing worth noting is that if we go into the port section, there will be an option that says install PortMaster. I've already done that, and I've already run PortMaster, but you can see here that you have access to all these PC ports. I've done a bunch of videos about this, including a dedicated one about PortMaster. I will also leave that one linked down below. This is a really cool service that allows you to download and install PC ports, up to 1,000 of them, which is kind of crazy. Anyway, that's about it when it comes to a setup guide for KNULLI. I'm really enjoying this operating system right now. A lot of these new features, like the ability to do a quick shutdown and resume, or the ability to set my own RetroArch hotkeys, are welcome additions to this operating system. And so this is one of my favorites right now. I'm really enjoying it. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and make sure that you check out that KNULLI website. They have even more features that I didn't cover in this video. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.